managing director of East African Breweries, and I were arrested by the police. You must always allow directors to express themselves, and you must also allow the executive to run the company. If you want to run the company yourself, then you better come and become an employee. But you cannot run a company from outside. Keep your hand out of the till. Do not interfere with the finance. If you start taking fuel for your trip to the company offices, you start borrowing money against your directorship. Those are dangerous things to do, because if you find yourself taking money from the company, what is there to stop the managing director from doing the same thing? And what is there to stop the financial director from doing the same? And you have no moral authority to stop them. You have to be absolutely clean for them to be clean.
His last challenge in the boardroom has been to turn around Uganda Clays Limited, the first company to be quoted on the Uganda Stock Exchange. The National Insurance Corporation, of which he was already a director, put him on the board. Then, in 2012, the National Social Security Fund, the largest shareholder in Uganda Clays, told the board that only the chairman of chairmen could save the ailing company, and the board said, "Martin, it's all yours." The day he signed the last 2 checks, clearing the bank loans, he felt a heavy load taken off. He had promised that he would not walk away from a company in the red.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome to the launch of the inaugural Non-Executive Director Awards, dubbed the NED Awards, powered by the League of East African Directors, commonly known as LEAD. My name is Dr. Stella Kivila, and I'm absolutely delighted to be your host this morning as we unravel this epic event, the launch of the NED Awards.
A few months ago, I was asked to lead the committee, or to set up the committee that would organize the NED Awards. At that time I was like, where do you start? Now this is the organizing committee of the NED Awards, and we would like to assure you that we have mapped out the process. E&Y, Ernst & Young, will be our accountability partners. Be assured that whoever wins the award will be the right person.
Because LEAD is really about promoting potential directors, current directors, giving prominence to those among us that have taken the responsibility to lead, not just in uncertain times, but also to take responsibility for important business in our country and in our region. And so today, as we talk about the NED Awards, it is really about recognizing, I described them in the video, the unsung heroes, those people that listen, those people that provide a sounding board, the people that bring the outside perspective, the people that ask the tough questions and hope to get answers.
The non-executive directors are the unsung heroes. The people who ask the questions, and I add on the better questions, are actually the people who are never or are not usually recognized But unless those questions are asked, you will never be able to get a better answer. We are glad that as EY to be part of this process, and therefore would like to let you know that only the winners will be announced.
And it's good that they're finally recognizing NEDs, because indeed they're the people who take a big risk, and yet sometimes they're not recognized on the board.
Thank them for what they are trying to do, the different aspects of appreciating those in governance structures and the NED Awards.
It has been a great occasion, there has been a great learning, and we're looking forward to this happening every year. It will be in our calendar in November. The recognition of directors who have excelled in their various organizations.
Ladies and gentlemen in the room and online, you are welcome to the inaugural Non-Executive Directors Awards Ceremony 2021.
The tone is set at the top. The board is at the apex of every entity.
Board members need to understand the importance of gender diversity as a strategic imperative.
The nominees are...
And the winner is Professor Vinand Nantulia.
I thank you for this honor bestowed upon me. Thank you very much.
I'm very honored to receive this, and thank you very much.
Having hard work, determination, and humility has made me achieve this.
I'm very much honored and humbled by this award.
The winner is Mr. Japheth Pato.
This is an award for all the NEDs I have worked with on the boards, because I'm the chair and I'm making some noise out there. But you are on the boards. The work that is done by the NEDs that are on those boards.
The winner is Dr. Martin J. Alike.
What I have to say is from a spouse's point of view, and you women, keep it up and do the work you have to do. Men, you're still there, you'll always be there, but women, let's get it on. Thank you very, very much on behalf of Dr. Martin Alike.
Born on the 21st of October 1928 at the chiefly village of Aworanga, 3 miles southwest of Gulu, a district headquarters in the northern part of what was then the British Protectorate of Uganda, now the Republic of Uganda.
The first directorship I was invited to the board was Cooper Motors Corporation, selling Volkswagen. And that was in 1963. And then I was invited by the breweries under Sir Michael Blundell to join the board of breweries in 1964, I think. Well, there are many things that happened to me in various companies, but I remember specifically about the breweries that we were told to look for a buyer in 1993 after the breweries was broadly given back to us after Amin in 79. Things were really bad. We sat down and I of the time that I was not willing to sell the breweries because it is the only company in which Africans were invited to participate in the first place, and to let it go, that would give the Nile Brewing Company a big advantage over the people.
His career in business began soon after he went into private practice in 1960 and later bought shares in the Cooper Motors Corporation, which imported Rover cars and Land Rovers from Britain, as well as Volkswagens from Germany. His first move into bigger business came with the alliance he formed in 1962 with Sir Michael Blundell, chairman Uganda Breweries, Tanganyika Breweries, Kenya Breweries, and the holding company East African Breweries, which was itself a subsidiary of Allied Breweries, a British company. He became a director of East African Breweries in 1966, as well as of the related company Ind Chartered Bank Uganda in 1967. He remained on the board of Uganda Breweries for 43 years. In his farewell speech, he remarked, "If I had known that the job was temporary, I would never have taken it." It was in 1992 he was invited to become a member of the African Regional Advisory Board of the Atlanta-based Coca-Cola Company, and in 2003 he became president of the Heritage Oil and Gas Company, Uganda Limited.
Challenge, what we found out was that no investment was made during Amin's time. And with the breweries and distilleries, you have to invest literally every month. If you don't do it, then the material will deteriorate. And I remember also, because I was also chairman of East African Distilleries, Waragi, when one lady, a prominent lady, died drinking Waragi, the managing director of East African Breweries and I were arrested by the police. You must always allow directors to express themselves, and you must also allow the executive to run the company. If you want to run the company yourself, then you better come and become an employee. But you cannot run a company from outside. Keep your hand out of the till. Do not interfere with the finance. If you start taking fuel for your trip to the company offices, you start borrowing money against your directorship. Those are dangerous things to do, because if you find yourself taking money from the company, what is there to stop the managing director from doing the same thing? And what is there to stop the financial director from doing the same? And you have no moral authority to stop them. You have to be absolutely clean for them to be clean.
His last challenge in the boardroom has been to turn around Uganda Clays Limited, the first company to be quoted on the Uganda Stock Exchange. The National Insurance Corporation, of which he was already a director, put him on the board. Then, in 2012, the National Social Security Fund, the largest shareholder in Uganda Clays, told the board that only the chairman of chairmen could save the ailing company, and the board said, "Martin, it's all yours." The day he signed the last 2 checks, clearing the bank loans, he felt a heavy load taken off. He had promised that he would not walk away from a company in the red.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome to the launch of the inaugural Non-Executive Director Awards, dubbed the NED Awards, powered by the League of East African Directors, commonly known as LEAD. My name is Dr. Stella Kivila and I'm absolutely delighted to be your host this morning as we unravel this epic event, the launch of the NED Awards.
A few months ago, I was asked to lead the committee or to set up the committee that would organize the NED Awards. At that time I was like, where do you start? Now this is the organizing committee of the NED Awards, and we would like to assure you that we have mapped out the process. E and Y, Ernst & Young, will be our accountability partners. Be assured that whoever wins the award will be the right person.
Because LEAD is really about promoting potential directors, current directors, giving prominence to those among us that have taken the responsibility to lead, not just in uncertain times, but also to take responsibility for important business in our country and in our region. And so today, as we talk about the NED Awards, it is really about recognizing, I described them in the video, the unsung heroes, those people that listen, those people that provide a sounding board, the people that bring the outside perspective, the people that ask the tough questions and hope to get answers.
The non-executive directors are the unsung heroes. The people who ask the questions, and I add on the better questions, are actually the people who are never or are not usually recognized. But unless those questions are asked, you will never be able to get a better answer. We are glad that as EY to be part of this process, and therefore would like to let you know that only the winners will be announced.
And it's good that they're finally recognizing NEDs, because indeed they're the people who take a big risk and yet sometimes they're not recognized on the board.
I thank them for what they are trying to do, the different aspects of appreciating those in governance structures and the NED Awards.
It has been a great occasion, there has been a great learning, and we're looking forward to this happening every year. It will be in our calendar in November. The recognition of directors who have excelled in their various organizations.
Hello, everyone. You're very welcome to the webinar tonight. My name is Ivan Kalema. I'm going to introduce our pro-locator tonight, Rosalind, and the rest, and she'll introduce the rest to us this afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, you're all welcome. All protocols observed. We are going to have a very nice evening sharing about ESG on the corporate board agenda, the why, what, and the how. I believe it's going to be worth writing home about. You can invite your friends who haven't yet joined, send a reminder, tell your colleagues, your fellow board members, and the rest of your team members. So let me take this opportunity to just introduce to you all Rosalind, who is going to take us through this program tonight. Let me just get Rosalind, you're welcome. So let me just give an overview of your profile, then we shall be good to go. There we are. Rosalind is a seasoned banker, a leader with lots of experience spanning over 17 years across technology, credit, data analytics products, and digital transformation. She has had the opportunity to innovate several banking solutions for clients across the full value range, and transformation, getting disrupted through digitally and through big data. She has worked with Barclays Bank, currently ABSA, Bank of Africa, and currently working with Standard Chartered Bank. She believes bringing passion to every aspect of her life, be it career, cooking, or personal. And she lives by the mantra, going big, go big or go home. Rosalind, what does that mean? Go big or go home. What does that mean? Before we
Thank you very much, Ivan. So go big or go home means do everything that you do with passion. Good afternoon, everyone, and you're very welcome to a very exciting agenda today. ESG on the corporate board agenda, the why, the what, and the how. We all know that the ESG agenda encompasses a broad range of issues, from human capital to climate change to compensation. It is being discussed at all boards and in various management committees. And there is a lot of dialogue going on, and we do not have the amount of information out there is in sachet, but it's yet to get together. Today, we have the opportunity to have with us a very robust and vast team of experience, from ranging from bankers to governance and risk management gurus in the industry. Allow me to invite the panel and to introduce the various panel members. We shall start off with our keynote speaker, the one and only Kathy Adengo. You're very welcome, Kathy. Kathy brings to this conversation a wealth of knowledge. Kathy is the head of sustainability at Stanbic Bank. She is responsible for the implementation of the ESG agenda at the bank. Kathy has a broad experience spanning over 18 years, and she has a proven track record in corporate affairs, reputation management, and CSR. And Kathy, among other things, has worked in the oil and gas sector, a sector that is being disrupted and is expected to be at the forefront of the ESG agenda. You're very welcome, Kathy. We are very honored to have you on this panel.
Thank you very much, Rosalind. Very good afternoon to you all. It's such a pleasure to be here today, and I'm looking forward to our conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Mr. Japheth Kato. And we are again very honored to have such an experienced and seasoned board and governance guru on this to steer this conversation with us. Mr. Japheth Kato is an FCCA and is the chairman of Stanbic Bank Uganda, Uganda Breweries Limited, among others. Mr. Kato was the first CEO of Uganda's Capital Markets Authority, a position that he held for 16 years until the end of 2013. And prior to that, he held over 20 years of several senior positions in accounting, auditing, insolvency, among many others in East Africa and in the United Kingdom. Japheth, you're very welcome to this panel. We are honored to have you on this panel and looking forward to very robust and deep conversations from yourself.
Thank you very much, Rosalind. It's a great pleasure to be on the panel and with the team, and I'm looking forward to a very enjoyable and insightful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Japheth. And next on the panel, we have Dr. Albert. Dr. Albert Otete brings to this panel discussion, again, just like the previous panelists that have introduced, a wealth of experience, very diverse in audit, accounting, tax, and business consulting. He previously worked with international accounting firms, that is PwC, KPMG, and in very senior positions. Dr. Otete is currently the Chief Executive Officer of JSR, a consulting group in East Africa. Dr. Otete, you're very welcome to this panel, and we look forward to hearing from you and learning a lot on what you have to give us in regard to the conversation on ESG. You're welcome, Doctor. Okay. We do also have what we are calling a wildcard, but we have been honored to have Ms. Proscovia Nabanja to join us on the panel, on this panel. Proscovia brings to this panel experience, a wealth of experience spanning over 20 years in the oil and gas industry, comprising of exploration, development, strategic planning, negotiation, and project execution. Her name is not new to all of us. She's been at the helm of the UNOC company and the recent FID arrangements among other stakeholders. She's currently the CEO of UNOC, and she serves as the chief operating officer previously. You're very welcome to the conversation, Proscovia, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm looking forward to the discussions. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And to open up the conversation this afternoon, I'm going to invite Kathy Adengo, the head of sustainability at Standard Bank, to take us through, who is the keynote speaker for us this afternoon. You're very welcome, Kathy. Over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Rosalind. Good afternoon to everyone who is on the discussion here today. It's such a pleasure to be with you. And of course, I know it's been very topical. Everybody has been talking about ESG, trying to understand what ESG is. And I'm quite honored to be having the opportunity to explain what this all means, and also in line with our theme, what it means for board of directors of different organizations, to try and give a general overview of what it means, not just from a financial sector, which is where I'm coming from, but to give you a general outlook on both sustainability and ESG, what it means for the board and what it means to actually implement. So I'd like to just get started. I have a presentation to share, so I'm just going to share my screen real quickly. Give me 1 minute. Okay. Ivan, just let me know if it's all good.
Yeah, it's all good.
Okay, I will turn off my camera for now, just to allow for the presentation to actually be clear. Just give me 1 minute. Okay, so great. I hope I'm audible. So thank you so much. Let's get started. We're going to get into exactly what ESG on the corporate board agenda really means. And through what I'm going to talk about, I just have a few things to touch on. And I thought it was important to first start with the context of understanding sustainability and understanding what ESG means. Just a general, what is it? What does it do? What does it mean, especially for a corporate organization or any business at large, any business? and then what ESG means for the role of the board, and what it basically means to implement ESG in a corporate organization, and what the future holds so that you can understand the trends and the opportunities to come. Okay, so in terms of context, I'm sure you've heard the definition before. I'm hoping you have, because sustainability really speaks to the idea that we want to ensure that we can meet our needs today without compromising the needs of the future generations to come. Really, that is the official definition. But it's premised on a couple of 3 pillars that form what sustainability is. And it's really about understanding the systems thinking behind it and how we are all integrated from an environmental perspective, an economic perspective, and a social perspective. And just to do a recap on these foundations, it will help you appreciate why ESG has been birthed as a framework in the world, and what it's going to do in terms of how it will assess organizations and their impact in these 3 areas going forward. So from an environmental perspective, look, we are living on the earth, and the way I like to say it is the earth was a gift to us as human beings. But we have a tendency to overuse resources that have been given to us, whether it's water, whether it's forests, whether it's land. And we're doing it at a very fast rate without understanding how they can replenish themselves. And weirdly, as a result of that, we are doing what I call self-sabotage. And we are actually endangering both human beings and animals and all the ecosystems that exist, which is why it's a central pillar to understanding how it all interconnects to the economy and to people. Because without a thriving environmental system, you will have human beings who are struggling for what they call basic needs. And what that means is that it has an impact on your economic sectors, whether it's through agriculture. The minute you don't have rain, you won't have a thriving agriculture sector. Uganda is heavily driven by agriculture, but imagine the day that you actually have no rain for a long period of time. It will be devastating, and we know what that means to society, and we know what that means to the economy. That is why all of this is integrated, but that's just one example, okay? Also, economic sustainability is key, because what we're trying to do here is look at how can we maintain a system that works, that ensures that all individuals have a secure source of livelihoods, okay? And linking back to what I said, we have to protect our environment so that certain sectors can thrive, certain areas can thrive in order for us to have thriving economies. And what that means from a social sustainability perspective is also aspects of respecting human rights, of ensuring that people have their basic necessities and access to resources such as healthcare and security. Also ensuring that we look at how leaders pay attention to labor and cultural rights and protect human beings from any sort of discrimination, which is why you hear the concept of equality and diversity being pushed forward in the agenda for ESG. So I thought I'd give this context as the basis for understanding this is what sustainability is all about. I would, in simple words, I would just say it's about protecting the longevity of the human race as we are here on this planet. And again, this planet is a gift to us. We need to recognize that that we are reliant on it, and we have to protect it at the same time, okay? Which brings me to a very fundamental point on the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which were created in 2015. The whole world has been driving towards the achievement of these goals, whether it's through the development sector, but for the private sector and our role in achieving these goals and contributing to the achievement of these goals, okay? So the reason I'm flagging this as a very key pillar or aspect to sustainability is that it is currently what is driving the global agenda. And as private sector, and I'm speaking from a private sector perspective, is what is our role and what impact are we going to have to contributing to achievement of these sustainable development goals? But later on in the presentation, I'm going to give you an opportunity, and I'll just showcase Stanbic Bank as a case study for what this means in reality once we're implementing sustainability and ESG. Okay, so what is ESG? Let's actually just break it down. And what has it got to do with sustainability and how it comes to life? Given the context, I've already touched on environmental and social, and you can start to see how this comes out. And ESG pretty much stands for environmental, social, and governance, which is now the new area. Governance is the word you're going to hear about more and more. But it's really a framework, like I mentioned, that assesses the impact of your sustainable and ethical practices as a company. Simple. That's really what it is. So it will assess what are your environmental impacts, and that could include how do your operations affect land, how do they affect water? If you're in say real estate, Are you doing construction? Are you in hydro dam construction? How are you affecting air quality? How are you affecting the natural ecosystems or any biodiversity? And which is probably a topic that will come up later on the oil and gas front. So social impact is also another key one. We will assess, and what it's actually trying to understand is, what is your business doing in relation to gender diversity and promoting gender diversity? How are you protecting human rights? How are you protecting human beings from a health and safety perspective? And these are actually drawn up as real measures that go into corporations, which is why you will see sustainability reporting focusing heavily on social impact aspects like our impact on communities and women. How are we supporting women? How are we supporting youth? How are we supporting diversity as a whole? How are we protecting human rights to ensure that, say, clients are not involved in engaging child labor just because they want to produce cheaply? So all these aspects come in, and we'll touch on environmental reporting for ESG a bit later in the conversation. But another key pillar is governance, which is basically looking at the accountability of the board, the conversation we're here for today, and ensuring that there is transparency of critical information and the protection of shareholder rights. Just to mention a few, but there's many other aspects that come with governance to ensure that organizations are doing as they are supposed to remain ethical and also meet the sustainability and ESG needs, okay, or priorities. But as you hear as people hear the acronym, they're probably mostly fascinated by how multifaceted the issues are. It might be a simple acronym, but there's a lot that goes into it for business that touches on things that are being assessed as an organization. So you might be in manufacturing, you might be in the financial sector, you might be in agribusiness, you might be in any area of the economy, but these are some of the areas that are assessed in terms of your impact. That are around ESG. And I'll just touch on a few, which could be around climate change and your impact on the climate, depending on your company. What are your operations doing that might impact this? Is there any implication on biodiversity loss? For example, if you have a real estate project that might have to be in a very pristine area, is there a chance that you're going to end up migrating animals? Or even the construction of a factory can do the same. So it depends on what your operations are. Plastics pollution is what is also being something we're trying to tackle. And you'll see a very huge drive about plastics collection in Uganda that's being done by very many partners in the private sector. It could involve soil degradation that we're trying to assess, water scarcity, occupational health and safety, human rights, anti-discrimination, and so much more. And then on the ethics side, it's about the corporate governance. Have you put in place the right standards, the right policies, the right board structures? Is there diversity being acknowledged within the boards? All of that is what organizations are going to prioritize. How are you engaging with your stakeholders? Are you being transparent? When you say you're going to implement any green initiatives within your organization, are you actually staying true to your word and true to your stakeholders? Are you involved in any political action or lobbying? These do impact how you are viewed by investors. Sponsorships and donations, they have to be very clear about your involvement. Some might be politically aligned, and ethical companies have to be very careful around how they trade in this area. Corporate social investment is also a key area that supports the achievement of ESG. And I'd like to mention at this point that ESG and sustainability are not the same as CSI, which is corporate social responsibility or investment. They are two different things, but it is an enabler to achieving your goals in ESG, right? So from a banking perspective, which is what I'd put on this other side, is that from our view, we look at how we're going to be lending our clients, understanding their risk portfolios, whether there's any reputation risk, how are they procuring, what is their human capital structure, are they business resilient, how are they dealing with investor relations, and basically how are all these aspects contributing to ensuring that the ESG matters that are highlighted here are being tackled and implemented accordingly within a company, okay? So I hope this helps. I know it's a mouthful of things to look at if you're looking at it for the first time, but as we go along the presentation, I'm going to show you how it comes to life. But what are the drivers of ESG globally, and what's actually pushing this conversation, and why is it critical? First things, we talk about the growing appetite for ESG investors. Investors are looking to put money behind companies they know are doing business the right way, very minimized potential for risk on these areas of environment, social, and governance, so that they can be assured of the longevity and sustainability and financial performance success of that organization. So right now you'll hear that they're what they call ESG rating agencies who would actually rate your organization based on your ESG practices. So if any company has good values and has been implementing them the right way, you would actually see the correlation between their ESG practices being put in place and their financial performance. And a clear example is if you're very focused on people and ensuring that people within your organization are well taken care of, and you are encouraging women to go up the ladder, and you are encouraging youth to be taken care of, more than likely over time, you start to see productivity and you start to see performance excellence. All of that can drive to performance excellence for an organization from a financial perspective. While the investments in ESG might be expensive at the start, long-term they benefit and bring the returns. There's also significant growth and disclosure requirements, like I mentioned earlier. ESG investors, as well as investors and shareholders in general, want to know about all the key things you're doing, and they expect your ESG reporting to be transparent in these areas. ESG risks are dominating as a global priority, especially around the issues of climate change. You can see the topic of just transition coming up. It's also a major concern. People want to understand if we are going to have a climate action plan for a nation like Uganda, or for organizations that want to contribute to this. What does it mean for economies once they want to have a just transition on their energy front, on the clean or green energy front? There is also shareholder pressure. Shareholders want to put money into companies that they believe are doing the right thing. Regulatory changes, you're going to see a lot of ESG regulation coming up that will affect various sectors, including the financial sector where we are. Also, SDG as a prize, it's a big thing. There's, and I mentioned earlier, there's a positive relationship between ESG performance and financial performance. And maybe what I would implore everybody to do is get a chance to look at top-rated ESG companies, and you will notice they all have something in common. They're doing very well financially, and they have excellent ESG practices. And among them is like Microsoft or Nike, or Unilever. You can see what they're doing in that space. Another thing that is concerning a lot of people globally is greenwashing. It's a term for once you have made commitments to as an organization to implement specific ESG measures. Sometimes these are glossed over and probably presented inaccurately. So there's a lot of reputation risk resulting from intention for companies to do the right thing, but then they don't. So that becomes an issue going forward for a lot of investors, and also for the success of any business. So let's dive into the role of the board. I know I have 20 minutes, so I'm going to try and move fast. The role of the board. So overall, ESG governance and oversight is one of the most critical parts in terms of the role of the board and their responsibilities, because investors are increasingly understanding that a company's performance on pertinent environmental and social governance factors directly affect long-term profitability. And therefore, they are recognizing that it's not just about transforming to sustainable investing, but it's simply a way of investing. It's just going to be the way we do business. We have to do it the right way to protect the environment, social, and have ethical governance practices. The role of the board will also be critical in driving the implementation of that strategy within a company. So it will be key for them to hold the executive committee and the management accountable for the priorities, and ensuring that on a regular basis there is a report to the board around the performance of the organization in the areas that have been agreed as priorities for ESG in that company. So this is one of the critical areas, which is pretty much governance and oversight. But also, I'd like to touch on the benefits to the board and why it's important to pay attention to this, is that it guarantees growth. Strong ESG practices show that companies that operate with integrity perform much better. Cost efficiency and reduction, innovation, and being pushed by ESG priorities are creating innovative business models, as well as innovation in products that are more sustainable. And you'll find that this could impact on supply chains. It could require fewer resources on a day-to-day basis. And basically, you start to rethink how you do business, which can result in cost reduction and cost efficiency. Also, it furthers investment from various investors. It's a good approach, and therefore can encourage further investment for the growth of the organization. Another key thing is that it reduces regulatory interventions because you will be ahead of the game. By the time regulation comes into place, once you have strong ESG policies and values, more than likely it will minimize the number of interventions from a regulation perspective that will be required, and also just smoothens your government relations. Understanding where your licenses are required or your standards are required and approvals, it will just actually allow that process to be a lot more effective because you are already performing well and reducing or mitigating on your risks from a legal perspective that the regulators would be very happy to see and the government would be happy to see as a whole. And then lastly, another key point on why it's important for the board to oversee this and the benefit of it is employee productivity. I can't emphasize this much stronger than I already have. The bread and butter for any organization, and anybody knows this, the foundation of the success of any company is your people. And if your people are taken care of in the right way and given the workplace satisfaction and given a sense of purpose to understand that their jobs are contributing to a greater good, they will have a sense of excellence and performing because they connect to a cause. Because, and I'll say this based on the experience I've had, is recognizing when people wake up every day and recognize that actually the reason I should be supporting, say, financing in the education sector is that it's going to help people go to school more. It's going to help students change their lives. It's going to help teachers have better opportunities. It's going to help the education sector grow. It helps a country grow, you know? So once you're behind a purpose, a cause that is greater than yourself, your teams will do anything to succeed for the organization. Yeah. So I just want to press that point because people are everything. Why you should also take a look at ESG is also from a risk management perspective, because failure to incorporate ESG right now, because it's not affecting a lot of organizations at the moment, at least in Uganda, well, globally it is, but in Uganda, is that once you fail to put in these practices, over time, they're going to be extremely surprising risky events that will show up in your company. One, it will increase the cost of doing business because, for example, if you're looking at things within your supply chain, people are going to supply from eco-friendly sources, and that means materials that are eco-friendly are likely to be more expensive. That's just one example. Reduced production efficiency can come as a result, especially for the people manufacturing and value addition. Then negative financial consequences if you get things wrong. Fines and penalties that will come as a result from regulators penalizing you. Excessive expenditure on managing just risks when they go wrong. When something actually goes wrong, you might be sued by a group of, community members just because you didn't participate in relocation or compensation the right way. There could be negative operational impacts like employee strikes, high staff turnover because they're not happy with your unethical practices. Community unrest, something I've just mentioned, environmental liabilities, individual director liabilities, and I have to mention this because it impacts board members, is that you would be liable for us going wrong in an organization, and this could lead to jail, this could lead to imprisonment, it could lead to so much litigation against directors as individuals. So this is why you have to look out. And I have seen a trend which is coming up around directors' compensation being tied to ESG performance. It hasn't happened in Uganda yet, but I don't want to say this because my board chairman is here and I need to protect my life. But but there's going to be a point that the performance is going to be tied. There will be, I think, in future, but not all organizations are adopting it. There will be a point that directors will be compensated according to the ESG performance of the companies on the boards they're on. Reputation damage is also a key thing. Loss of license of operation could be a risk. So these are just a few, in fact, a number, but there are a few of the various risks that need to be mitigated and avoided and should be a concern for any board members. So in terms of implementing ESG in a corporate company, what does it look like? First things first, you have to get the structures right. The governance structures actually ensure that you have the right policies, policy standards, and people and resources and structures put to support the implementation of any ESG or sustainability strategy. So at a very high level, you've got, you have to have the board members and probably an oversight from a board risk management committee. A sustainability team should be created within an organization. There has to be a technical advisory support, maybe through consultants, and then the rest of the business units who actually implement who actually implement the work. Because remember, the cross-functional support of all the businesses ensure that the sustainability or ESG priorities are implemented through them. And this is why they have to be tied into setting the goals and the objectives for any company. So this is the first thing that happens. I will make reference, and maybe I'll share it at a later stage, to the governance structures that we have within Stanbic Bank. It's within our ESG report that is on our website as a group. So you'll be able to see that if you want to see the governance structures and how the role of the committees and what the committees are there to do. And these same structures are applied in any other sectors as well, just to ensure that it's implemented. But the most important part is setting the committees to setting the committees within the organization, having direct board responsibility to report to, and there has to be an execution team, which is what you see here, like myself, who ensures that the strategy is being developed and executed. And as a case study, just to show what sustainability looks like in an organization, this is our sustainability framework for Stanbic Bank, and we have ensured that they align back to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. As I mentioned earlier, this is what all private sector as well as the development world is all gearing towards, and this is how we want to contribute. We've chosen financial inclusion because it's what we do, and our role is to ensure that more people have access to affordable financial products and is serving the development of the economy. We are very keen on good job creation and enterprise growth. Uganda is a very entrepreneurial country. 75% of the economy is driven by SMEs. We want to be a part of that sustainable journey and growth for SMEs. Infrastructure remains very critical. We want to be behind large-scale infrastructure projects while ensuring that our environmental and social risks are managed and minimized appropriately. But infrastructure is pretty much the foundation for economic growth, and this is why we're there. Africa trade and investment is another key area. We want to open markets for Africa. We want to open markets for Uganda to global markets like China, and this is why we're getting involved in Africa trade investment flows. Climate change and sustainable finance is a big area that we're diving into. You'll be seeing a lot more work that will come into the public domain that you see that we're doing to support this area. Education remains a very key pillar, especially for Africa as a whole and for Uganda, and supporting the healthcare sector is where we're also going to participate, both from a business perspective in terms of financing, but also from our corporate social investment initiatives. And how all of these align? They align to a number of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. But in action, this is what we do every day, and it's supported by a strategy that ensures it's being implemented, even from the risk management perspective. So what does the future hold? Basically, ESG centricity promotes long-term value and value creation for multiple stakeholders. So you will hear shareholders asking more and more for understanding your ESG approach as an organization, or investors. There's going to be greater ESG focus from investors. It will determine where they put their money, and they're going to be demanding for high quality ESG data. For example, your water use, your electricity, all these energy initiatives, the data is going to drive that. Also, future enterprises will be ESG centric. So all CEOs who are focusing on that will recognize that it will basically transform the way they're operating and their business models are. It will reshape business strategies, and there's going to be more regulation in the future, especially around disclosures and reporting. But at the end of the day, what ESG is going to do is build more resilient organizations that you're going to see in the future, transforming not only the economies they're in, but globally as well. So thank you very much, and I'd like to conclude this presentation. And I look forward to our Q&A session, where I'll be happy to have a conversation with you about these aspects. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Catherine. That was a very deep and detailed presentation. And drawing from some of the things you've picked up on, we shall start our Q&A session. And I'll start with Mr. Japheth Kato. And I'll start with a topic on board oversight and the structures. I know, Kathy, you've shared some of the frameworks that you're working with, but I know that there are quite a number of frameworks out there that are being implemented, and they depend on they will depend on the organization structure, but also they depend on the sector. Mr. Kato, the question for you this evening to start with, as you share with us the different oversight structures that you would recommend, which which of the ones that have been rolled out currently especially in the manufacturing industry, which is affecting the climate the most, would you recommend for most of the boards to implement the structures? Thank you.
Thank you, Rosalind. Thank you, Kathy, for a great presentation. Now, we're talking about climate change. Where I am in Ntinda, it is heavy rain, heavy wind, and hailstone. Power has gone off. And as we listen to the news, it's Ukraine could bring a war, another world war along. So things are very dynamic. But to answer you, Rosalind, Kathy has gone through a lot of the key pillars of the board. Just one supplement to add to what you said. This whole shift from what we call shareholder capitalism to stakeholder capitalism, and you remember some top guys sitting down and saying the business is not here just to make profit, but also the environment. And then the other issue that has been emphasized now in corporates, the issue of purpose. And Kathy did mention that, as people identify, especially the young people now, are identifying themselves with purpose. They would turn down an offer because they don't identify with the purpose and the values of that organization. So different organizations have taken different structures. Now, I'll be honest with you, if you look at board papers of either financial services or manufacturing, and I sit on boards that are in those two lines, the ESG is now all over the place. And I was just checking with my friend Alan from EABL, who shared an article with us recently, and who is responsible for the reporting on ESG, to just see how ESG has moved in the risk profile. So, as a board, it is totally accepted now that ESG is a board matter, because as Kathy told us, investors are interested, shareholders are interested, customers are interested in it, the lenders. So it is a board matter. Therefore, it is also a matter of strategy. You have got to have the strategy. It has been ingrained now in the strategy of the organization. And of course, you also determine the allocation of capital. And we talked about risk, and all those are board roles. Now, so different companies will have different ways of how they actually deal with the ESG matters. And I think your question, how do you deal with it? Because of its width, and you could look at the presentation, that it covers every aspect of the business. So you could say, let's have ESG as a board matter. We'll discuss it at the board as a whole. However, as we know, that's not usually very efficient. So organizations will have to find where is the right fit for ESG. Now, interesting, if you look at it, it touches on so many committees. If you look at the nominating committee, for instance, nominating and governance committee, we're talking about boards and we're talking about skills. Now the nominating committee looks for boards. So where that could be a committee responsible for getting the right skills on the board. But also, how about the shareholder engagement? Because we know they are very keen on this. So that could be there. Compensation committee, Kathy touched on it. If it has not happened, it is going to happen. Compensation is going to be related to ESG performance and the ESG index and that. So that could be compensation. Of course, the ability for people and the staff could be there. But then there is our old committee called audit. Definitely, and we are going to talk about reporting. Now, the audit committee will definitely have an interest in the disclosures. How is that disclosed? How is it disclosed in the annual statement? Is it consistent with everything else that we are saying? So that's come there. Then where those organizations which separate audit and risk, like we do in the banking sector, the risk is definitely going to have a very big interest, because the ESG creates certain risks that were not, they have always been there, but that were, because there's nothing new. The environment has been there, the social has been there, the governance has been there, but the awareness that has increased. Therefore, risk is now looking more at the risk that the environment will bring, the social impact will bring, the COVID issue, that the COVID pandemic that we have been through and we are still through, it's not yet over, has brought certain risks that were not there. They also touch on human. So that will be the committee. And of course, we talked about things of diversity and so on. So what has happened then, of course, when we talk about risk, and I know my friend Albert is an expert on that, there is also, we have got, when you put things like this to a risk committee, you may miss the opportunity part of it, because ESG, whereas it is a risk, but it also creates very many new opportunities that will come up. So you've got to, so what some organizations have done is they have put ESG in the risk or audit and risk or risk committee, but there are other organizations that are creating separate ESG committees so that they can actually bring together all the different aspects. So on both boards where I sit, East African breweries, Uganda breweries, and Stanbic, we are looking at risk on that. However, we do understand also the business opportunities that have been brought. So that really would be my take on that. But to appreciate that it goes beyond and impacts every committee. And if you could see on the chart, Kathy as head of sustainability, you can see she's touching every aspect of the business. So I would encourage you board members and so on to think carefully where you think it fits most, to be able to take advantage. Whatever it is, definitely the terms of reference of those committees have had to be changed to be able to incorporate the different aspects of ESG. And for Kathy, we just recently, just last week, we approved the ESG framework, which he has presented there. So let me stop here, but that would be my take on that one, Rosalind. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Japheth. That was a very detailed input. And drawing from your comments, I would like to turn to Dr. Albert. And Dr. Albert, from a reporting perspective, the pressure for enhanced disclosure is on right now. Most shareholders want to see proper disclosure by the boards and the management of the organizations in which they are investing. So what reporting frameworks have you seen being used for board reporting and oversight for the ESG strategies? And bringing it home from a Uganda context, which ones do you think would best suit an emerging economy like Uganda that is trying to embrace ESG? Over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. As Japheth has indicated, too much rain and it's affecting even the power stability here where I am. Rosalind, are you able to hear me?
Yes, please, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Okay, so yeah, good afternoon once more to all the members who are attending and also the panelists for today. Thank you, Kathy, for the presentation. You were spot on. And also thanking Japheth for the feedback regarding this topic. So I'm also just going to just add on the aspects which are already there. It's still a new concept in Uganda, but I believe that we shall all learn something today. But just touching on the issue of reporting, yes, I think somewhere Japheth was referring to the report for Stanbic Bank. So basically what we see is that this ESG, by the way, has been around for a while, almost 17 years. So if you go and look at the literature, you'll see that some of those developed countries have been talking about ESG for a while. But the challenge now we have is the organizations are getting confused about how best to report. And I believe that the members who are attending today are also interested. So how do we report ESG efforts and progress over time in such a way that whatever you are writing is credible to shareholders and other stakeholders. So I think that's why you will see somewhere that after the COP26, that is the conference, or what you call it, a conference of the parties, 26, which was in Glasgow in November last year, came up with an understanding where there was a resolution, I think, to create the International Sustainability Standards Board, ISSB. So that board, I think, will do a great job in setting standards which companies can now follow to report on sustainability and also ESG in broad sense. We are looking forward to those standards being concluded, and then the next step is to implement or to adopt them on a country basis. So in terms of reporting, Rosalind, when you look at the companies which are listed on the stock exchange, these are companies that tend to prepare annual reports. And you look at the annual reports, they're quite comprehensive, and they have sections for sustainability reporting. So just before I forget to talk about Uganda, I'll just take you through just a sample of these companies. And then also, of course, I will talk also about Finance Trust Bank, where I'm a non-executive director, and then also about NSSF, where I'm a board advisor. But just to give you a highlight, for example, Umeme, you all know about that company. It has even an ESG committee. So it's the only company that I've seen which has the ESG committee. And of course, it has sustainability report embedded in its annual report. However, there was no mention which standards they were using for preparing that report. Yes, but it has the ESG framework. The other companies which have sustainability reports would be CIPLA QC, Uganda Clays, of course, Stanbic Bank, DFCU, New Vision as well. These are just the sample which I picked, but there are many others. I try to avoid the cross-listed companies like the KCB, Equity Bank, or those ones. But in terms of the standards, I think you asked the question, what standards are being used to report? So what I observed here is that NSSF and of course the financial institutions, DFCU and Stanbic, they are using the framework of Global Reporting Initiative. So take note of that. It is called Global Reporting Initiative, GRI. So basically what happens is that you create a checklist of what are the requirements of GRI, and you are trying to give yourself a score, and then you publish that score in your annual report. Other standards or other frameworks, we have Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. There's Value Reporting Foundation, Climate Disclosures Standards Board, and maybe many others. So what the world is trying to move towards is one body which can come up with standards. That's why we are coming up with International Sustainability Standards Board, ISSB, which has already started working. It will be working together with the International Accounting Standards Board because all these things which are being reported in the sustainability report somehow have a cost implication and financial implication. Therefore, it is important that if the annual report is published, that the external auditors look at the financial statements, but they also look at the other information that is accompanying the financial statements. Therefore, it is important that these standards are actually disclosed, such that anyone who is auditing sustainability report can actually validate what is being said. Of course, these two organizations, IASB, International Accounting Standards Board, and ISSB, they are part of the International Financial Reporting Standards Foundation. So I think this will be very useful going forward for companies which are doing reporting on sustainability. But just to say, of course, the bigger the company, the better their reporting is. So if you look at Umeme, for example, total assets of 2.7 trillion, NSSF, 13 trillion, Stanbic Bank, 4.9 trillion, DFCU, 3.5. So you can see these are very large organizations. But when you come to, let's say, a bank like Finance Trust Bank, where it is 0.3 trillion, you find there are some challenges. So you have to do cost-benefit analysis of implementing global standards. You have to make sure they are fit for purpose and that the reporting is useful to the readers. So Jocelyn, Rosalind, I'm not sure whether I have any more time to comment or I can stop at this point.
Thank you, Albert, Dr. Albert. I'll come back to you shortly. Let me just now I will go to Ms. Proscovia Nabanja, but I'm going to dive into what you've just spoken to, Dr. Albert, the metrics that are being reported about to the board, one of them being the risk parameters. And Proscovia, the question for you is, what are the major perceived risks? And I know Kathy detailed quite a laundry list of these risks, but there are those pertinent risks, those risks very pertinent to the oil and gas sector, in line with the fact that it's now a very topical issue for us in Uganda. What are the perceived risks that the ESG that the boards need to be very mindful of and look out for? And what should boards do to ensure that these ESG related risks are reliably disclosed? So it ties in a bit with Dr. Albert's reporting matrices. Thank you. Over to you, Proscovia.
Thank you so much, Rosalind, and I hope everyone can hear me. There's quite a huge storm out of my office. Just confirm that you can hear me. Okay, perfect. So I think I'll follow on from where Dr. Albert started the conversation from. In light of coming out of COP26, while there is continued pressure on hydrocarbon investment and moving away from hydrocarbons to greener energy sources, it certainly has a short-term and long-term impact on energy supply. Now, yes, COP2016 had all the good intent, but certainly fell short of addressing the issues of energy poverty for Africa. And I want to put this into context. Well, Africa sits in a unique and fragile domain. We are the lowest emitters, but certainly of high impact. And we only contribute 3% of the global emissions, and Uganda in particular is contributing 0.014% of the global emissions. Now, of course, the energy poverty levels are worrying, with the electricity connections just above 20%. Yet we envisage the oil and gas sector to propel industrialization. And I think the same applies for most of the African economies. The indicators are clear, starting off with the improvement of balance of payments in excess of $591 million annually, the potential jobs that are going to be created, 164,000 jobs, contribution to national capital formation in excess of 8.3 billion for the refinery and 11 billion for the industrial park, and the net fiscal impact in excess of 800 million. And why am I saying all these numbers? Is to put into perspective the fundamental role that the oil and gas industry can play for Uganda and perhaps the rest of the African countries. Now, of course, there is also the potential integration of the sector like the oil and gas sector with other sectors of the economy, such as agriculture, and also the ability to improve or boost agriculture compared to the current situation where we are importing fertilizers from foreign countries. If we can make those fertilizers in-house, then it helps us boost our agriculture. And opening up petrochem, and when you look at the broad number of the anticipated net revenues that are coming into the economy, it's anticipated that 47 billion of net revenues are going to come into an economy that is just slightly above 30 billion, and an investment of about 15 billion in the next 5 years. Now, of course, these metrics are quite critical for us, and they can't be ignored in terms of the fundamental contribution they will make to the economy. And also remember, most of the national development plans for African countries are focused on utilizing their resources for industrialization to transform their economies. Now, with a drive for the current ESG and the move away from fossil fuels, this means that there is a potential loss in energy security for most of the African countries, therefore increased energy poverty, moreover in a fast-growing population in Africa. And one of the other risks that we are seeing is reverse adaptation to biomass. And we shouldn't forget that while we talk about energy transition, climate change, and all these things that are being discussed at COP26, there is a fundamental issue that is popping up for African countries based on the fact that most of the population is relying on biomass. And if we can't move them from biomass to LPG, which is produced from the oil and gas industry, then there will be reverse adaptation. Remember, currently, the statistics are that 120,000 hectares are destroyed annually in Uganda, while only 70,000 hectares are planted annually. So the fundamental question would be, what are you transitioning from and what are you transitioning to? So we believe as an industry, we need to address the impact of some of the decisions that are being made globally on the issue of energy poverty. Of course, there would be potential loss of direct foreign investment, loss of investment appetite, and I've heard Kathy talk about capital flight to greener projects. Certainly, we see all these risks coming up. But how do we navigate this dynamic as an oil and gas industry? Number one is to make sure that we are prudent. We do not ignore the aspects of ESG, but continue to pursue well-structured processes of approval of our projects, bearing in mind the climate change concerns. And of course, our view is that the environmental and social impact assessment for all the projects are done with wide consultation with key stakeholders, including communities, leaders, national level influencers, so that all the aspects of ESG are embedded in the planning, right from the planning phase. Of course, the mitigations are put in place to achieve the highest level of standards for environmental and social impact management, from technical designs, from resettlement of project affected persons, using the IFC standards to improve livelihood and resettlements. And our approach really is to cap the emissions while developing the oil and gas resources for the economic good. And some of the key initiatives we've done today is the implementation of solarization across some of our key projects, like the East African Crude Oil Pipeline. We have another initiative coming in terms of tree planting and creating a carbon sink to achieve net zero for our projects. So I believe a balanced approach towards economic development for the country and ESG is very key, but this is going to require meeting of minds, key stakeholders on the table to make equitable decisions, because you'll agree with me that the parameters that we would use for the Western world shouldn't be the same parameters we would use for a country like Uganda or a continent like Africa. So we need a balanced approach. And I always tell people when I have this conversation on ESG that while addressing issues of energy poverty is really like labor pains. And if someone hasn't gone through those labor pains, they cannot be able to describe how painful labor is unless you've gone through the labor pains. So from an African perspective, we have to put into consideration the growing population and the need to eradicate energy poverty. That may require quite some policy reviews and fiscal incentives to allow industry to spend more money on innovative solutions. After all, we know that the oil and gas industry is well known for research and development, and we integrate efficient systems into the entire supply chain. Point taken that we need to learn from the shortfalls and innovate. And of course, while incorporating ESG, it will potentially increase the cost of the projects, but we believe if we do so, it will be for a greater good rather than going away from the oil and gas industry. Of course, there are more risks that we're seeing, but it will require commitment from all shareholders and the board. We need to go beyond, we should do something and put more emphasis on how to make it happen. Sustainability must be woven into the fabric of every company. And we need to relook at the leadership models, the operating models, the structuring of our organizations, because we believe there is key reason for us to have a conversation on ESG at shareholder level and at board level. While we talk about these things, I think there's also need to commit to ESG policy statements, DEI policy statements, and also look at rebalancing the environmental, social, and economic needs to achieve that sustainability, and not look at it as just a compliance or a regulatory issue, but be part of the shared value. We need to revisit the purpose of our organizations and companies. We've seen most of the companies rebranding themselves to broad energy companies with net zero ambitions. So we cannot ignore the impact of climate change on our organizations. Kathy touched on the aspect of culture, which is really fundamental. And working on culture of organizations to ensure that the ESG aspects are institutionalized with focus on measuring the right metrics and delivering ESG value is very fundamental. We need to create a voice of sustainability in our organizations. The staff need to buy into organizations that have a good cause for the greater good. And we need to make the strategy agile to address the emerging trends in ESG, need to invest in a diverse and inclusive team to spur innovation, which is becoming very critical for our industry, and risk profiling the implications of non-commitment to ESG. The oil and gas industry is not necessarily running away from ESG, but it needs to have a balanced approach. And of course, there are implications for not committing to ESG, like capital flight, and the cost of the projects. So we need to track, disclose, and make sure that the process is auditable on ESG performance. Such initiatives will help us avoid what Catherine called greenwashing. And as industry, of course, is one of the key things that has been highlighted globally, that we take the defensive position instead of being pragmatic. So we need to engage more stakeholders, from employees to customers to supply chain partners, communities, regulators, capital markets, so on and so forth, and listen to their voices and create solutions that address all key stakeholder issues. So more partnerships are required to push the boundaries to what is possible. This will happen as soon as we make a cohesive effort to bring different partners on board. And as you know, we are creating a climate action plan, and we'll be calling upon partners to join us to take the strides towards our net zero ambitions for our projects. But a collaborative model that defines how to create value, capture that value, and deliver that value will help us implement our ESG strategy. So yes, to your point, the oil and gas industry has been positioned in a way that it's been attacked by so many organizations as being the polluter. But I believe that having the experience of innovation, technology, we can be part of the solution rather than being looked at as part of the problem. Thank you, and back to you.
Yes, thank you very much, Proscovia, for the very profound remarks. The key takeout for me there being the deliberate policy reviews and stakeholder engagement, where we need to actually include the communities in which we are operating, especially in the space of energy, oil and gas, who are definitely going to be most impacted or not. Thank you for that. We'll now move on to our Q&A session so that we can allow more interaction from the audience. Once again, I would like to welcome and thank everyone who has made it to this webinar. We have representation from Kenya, India, Nigeria, the USA, among others. You're all very welcome, and I encourage you to all participate on the chat group and ask as many questions as possible. I'll start with a few that have already come through, and Dr. Albert, this is what I was referring to, that I would come back to you. The first one from Dixon Ajina, and Dixon, thank you for asking this question. Regarding ESG reporting, established foreign firms are adopting the ESG intelligence, automated data analytics and reporting tools with AI intelligence as top of mind. Please provide some insights regarding the adoption and usage of these, regarding the adoption and usage of these tools in emerging African markets and the foreseeable future. Over to you, Dr. Albert, for that question.
Okay, thank you very much, Dixon, for the question regarding the ESG reporting. As I already said, yes, a number of the multinationals and maybe some of the regulated companies are reporting something on ESG. Of course, they just now need to have the standards agreed upon such that when a regulator, for example, like Bank of Uganda, is reviewing reports from the banks, they want to see that they can compare them apple against apples. But in terms of what he's saying, definitely, whenever standards are published, a company has to look at their existing systems and see whether the systems can help generate information that will be used for ESG reporting. So if you have tools like artificial intelligence, then it's a matter of determining whether that tool can actually extract information and publish it somewhere and store it, and then you are able to read it. Remember, the artificial intelligence is just using previous information and trying to apply it in an artificial sense. So it's rightly so, even for financial reporting standards, indeed, companies had to invest in tools. And those ones which have invested are reaping the benefits going forward. So what I can say is that AI is actually a very good addition, such that the ESG reporting is not cumbersome, but actually is very smooth and can be audited accurately. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Albert. I'll move on to Robert Lule, and this question will be for you, Mr. Japheth Kato. How is the regulator, especially Bank of Uganda, assessing the potential risks related to ESG non-compliance? Do we have a regulatory policy on this? And maybe what I would add on to this, Mr. Japheth Kato, is what are the other regulators like UCC for the pollution from the telcos, for example, or from the masts, and what policies are in place? Over to you, Mr. Kato.
Thank you very much, Rosalind. Just before I go to that, could I just supplement on Albert? The question of reporting standards. I think it is very, very important that as we welcome the creation of the international sustainability standards, report board under the IFRS Foundation. They've got long experience in IFRS and so on. We need to learn from that experience, because I see in the Q&A quite a number of questions on SMEs. What we found in the accounting profession is that whereas the international financial reporting standards were okay for big companies and so on, we found small companies marginalized. Hence, the pressure to create actually a separate standard for small and medium enterprises. So I think we need to watch this trend. And as Albert was saying, some of the bigger companies can use AI and so on and so forth. However, the ESG challenge, the environmental challenge, the social challenge are not only limited to the big companies, but also the small companies. So we need to find a way of doing the reporting of that. I did cross-check regarding the regulators that I know, for instance, our neighbor in Kenya, the central bank has issued guidance on ESG risk management standards, and also the Nairobi Stock Exchange has. I just cross-checked, but I think it must be work is coming from BOU. If somebody is there, you can correct me on some guidelines on that type of reporting. But at the moment, they are seeing it as a risk. So when they come to their risk, checking how you handle your risk and so on like that. But I think there will be a lot of direction on that in terms of how do you report. So the stock exchanges, the central bank, the insurance, because I mean it is a broad section. It covers everybody. The telecoms, I'm not sure, but maybe somebody online can give us how they are doing that. And it is important that the focus, as Proscovia said, the focus should not be only on oil and gas. I mean, it is something that is everybody wants to talk about. But this, the challenge, the environmental challenges, the social challenge, the governance challenge go beyond oil and gas, although that has become the focus. But also we must be quite aware and conscious of this bandwagon effect. If you watch during COP26, there was a video about a gentleman from India who was talking about a transition, and as Proscovia was talking about, people don't have energy, poor, and so on. And the guy was saying a transition and look at the future and so on. And he said, but wait a minute, how do you tell somebody to look at the future in 2030 when he has no present at the moment? So we've got to be very conscious of that. So I think that's what there is. It is work in progress, Rosalind, in terms of standards, and my group has raised. The pressure is on to make sure that there are specific standards for regulators, what is expected of the license of the entities that are licensed, the stock exchange, the capital markets authorities, and all the other regulators, NEMA. So the regulations are there, but it's a question of putting them together around ESG now. And that would be my take on that one. But we need to understand that we're talking about basics here. As again, going back as we talk oil and gas and so on. I mean, they're basic things. The Buvera is an environmental risk. I mean, you don't need a standard, to get rid of them or to report how you got rid of them. So we must also think about the basic things. So there will be I don't know who is taking total responsibility for this, whether it's NEMA or somebody else. There need to be a very strong awareness about the damage to the environment, other than just focusing on some of the industry that are more sexy than others. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kato. And maybe do we want to think about a ministerial post at the risk of sounding political, just to handle this ESG? Moving on to Kathy, you talked about financial inclusion. As this is a question from Geoffrey Sajabi. You talked about financial inclusion as one of the ways in which you support the social aspect. What extent do you influence the practices of those you lend to align with ESG requirements? Would you say you face situations where you need to adhere to ESG, where your need to adhere to ESG might conflict with some of your business aspirations? Over to you, Kathy.
Okay, yes. One of the things we've started to implement is a clear sort of ENS, an environmental and social risk assessment as we're lending to our clients. So even if they're SMEs, one of the things we encourage our clients to do is assess certain criteria of how they're conducting their business and whether it has any environmental impact and whether it has any social impact. So we do have a process in place that we're starting to implement fully, working especially with both big clients and smaller clients to get an understanding of what they need to put in place in order for them to be more sustainable. And an example I can give is probably, maybe smart climate agriculture, so that while they're actually doing their practices, they're doing them in the right way with the right environmental aspects that they consider, the right mitigation measures, because there's also a tendency within agriculture to at times create environmental risks without knowing, sometimes without knowing, and also how you use the land is critical and what biodiversity you might impact. So sometimes that can happen. You could be in the agriculture space, but you're creating more harm than you are creating good. So, so one of the things we're doing as part of our environmental and social sort of mitigation measures is we put in place an assessment before we lend so that we try and help the client understand what's needed before they're given the financing so that they actually conduct their business the right way, considering that our financing will have that indirect impact on the economy. So if our financing is asking for diversity questions like, are you hiring women in your factory? Are you ensuring there's diversity? These questions are being asked from a point of like there's a good spirit behind the intention. And we just want to ensure that the right practices start being implemented by these companies, whether small, whether big, but they start to think about them and start to work towards achieving those goals. So that's some of the work that we're doing. It will take time before everybody gets it right, but we've started, and the point is to start.
Thank you, Kathy. I have another interesting question, and I think it will be for you, Ms. Praskovia Nabanja. The common temptation that is observed in some ESG reporting content is an attempt to infuse some CSR and PR aspects, which can risk classifying one's otherwise good intentions for greenwashing. And this is a question from Charles Mwesige. I don't know if you can opine on this, Praskovia. Over to you.
Thank you so much. And I think, of course, there's been issues around what sort of reporting do you do for ESG vis-a-vis corporate social responsibility. Because corporate social responsibility from an oil and gas perspective is a different sort of perspective compared to ESG. And we know that when you invest in corporate social responsibility, according to the agreements that we signed, that is not cost recovery. Whereas it's imperative to invest in ESG, which would be cost recoverable. So we know that from the oil and gas perspective, ESG is more driven around how do you compensate the people, how do you do your technical engineering across all projects, are you engaging the stakeholders, compared to going out and, maybe establishing a health facility or supplying mosquito nets. That's a totally different angle. So for us, it's totally two different things. Otherwise, if you try to infuse ESG into CSR, you're literally not measuring the right metrics. I don't know if that is helpful at all.
It is helpful, but I do have a rejoinder to what you've just said, Praskovia. When you look at the ESG agenda, and especially in the African context, you find that the environmental, which is the climate aspect of it, is what is emphasized for the greater world. And I think that's where the conflict between CSR and the S comes into, because for Africa, what would really speak to us would be the social aspect of the ESG. So in your opinion, how should then organizations go about managing that delicate line between the S and the CSR so that the S of the ESG acronym is not then confused with the CSR? How can they be very intentional about it?
Okay, so in terms of the social aspects, of course, when you're looking at CSR programs, you are kind of looking at how you give back to the community that you're working in. From a social perspective in ESG, you're looking at how you ensure that wherever you're working, you're creating a project that is sustainable in terms of giving, let's say, economic empowerment to the community. For instance, if I decided to get into planting 4 million trees, I can do it from an ESG perspective, but also make sure that I transform the livelihood of the people within that project. For example, instead of planting trees that are not going to be used perhaps for economic transformation, let's say people cutting it for timber after a certain number of years, or getting fruits to empower the women within a community, then you would have lost it all. So it has to be tied together. If you're working on environmental aspects of tree planting, you make sure that that project does not only address the issues of climate change, but it also changes the well-being of the people within the project area that you're dealing with, rather than you giving some sort of incentive for the population through a CSR program. So I think there is need to integrate all the issues related to environment and the social aspect while addressing the issues of ESG.
Thank you very much. I think that's quite spot on. I'll move on to you, Dr. Albert, and there's a question again from Robert Lule, and he says, for ESG-centric organizations, don't they stand a risk of losing out on the profit-driven culture? And I know this is one of those questions that most organizations are struggling with. So, Dr. Albert, if you can opine on that, thank you.
Thank you, Robert, for the question. Pursuing ESG strategy does not mean that the organization has to abandon a pursuit of profits or running their business efficiently. I think at the beginning of the presentation by Kathy, she was trying to highlight some of the benefits of ESG. And I remember she mentioned that the company could benefit in terms of growth, cost efficiency, and of course, employee productivity. So that means that ESG strategy is a good thing, and that the company actually could end up even earning more profits by pursuing those strategies. And I also said that the sustainability, when you read the sustainability reports from some of the companies, which I mentioned, for example, Umeme and so on, they mention financial sustainability also as part of the sustainability that is important. But they also, of course, touch on environment, definitely like Umeme. If it is distributing electricity, then there's something to do with the environment as they try to lay their poles. Then, of course, also social. What is society talking about your products and services? So what I can say is that the costs of ESG are minimal. Maybe the first years could be challenging, but they are really part of the operating expenses or compliance expenses. And it does not necessarily mean that the company now will end up being loss-making or that their profits will be heavily downgraded because of the ESG framework. So I think that's what I can comment at this stage. But now, just on touching on something else, okay, she also talked about the risks. If you don't implement ESG, there's also some risks which you can face one of them being reputational risk. Indeed, she talked about greenwashing, where a lot of companies are trying to publish information, and maybe if you don't fact check, you might believe what the company is saying, but might be doing something else. So reputational risk can be damaged if ESG also is treated very lightly. And of course, financial consequences and also loss of license can also happen. So I think it is a balancing act. And Japheth also mentioned that in terms of governance, apart from UMEME, which has ESG committee, the rest of them are covering the ESG and board, audit, and risk committee, or like for financial services, it is the board risk committee, because ESG is talking about risks to the environment. What are the risks to society? And if you have poor governance, definitely you might have a challenge. Thank you very much.
I'll take about 3 more questions. There's one from Temi Maya, and Catherine, this is for you. She says, thank you for your presentation. I would like to know, how does the bank influence its partners? And here I mean clients, be it private entities and governments, in observing ESG in their work and in relation to you. Now, over to you, Catherine.
Okay, thank you, Rosalind. Yeah, that's an excellent question. It kind of ties into what I had kind of mentioned earlier. The way we can influence partners is from the discussions we hold with them prior to lending, because we're a financial institution, we're there to finance businesses. But what's very important for us is to have the conversation about ESG before large transactions and big contracts are actually given. So how we influence partners is the discussions happening between us before we finance large projects or any deals. And this is always through a process in our credit process, which is called the ENS risks assessment, which we do. We've started to do and more elaborately. So it's very important to have those conversations before they actually kickstart something that they need the financing for. Even for expansion of an already existing project, we will have those conversations as well. Yeah. So that's how it's done. And then the other bit is maybe from a private sector perspective, what I'd call stakeholder partnerships towards specific causes. We're trying to make sure we're very deliberate with our engagements across different private sector players in initiatives that we believe can sort of boost any environmental or social causes. And this might be through our philanthropy part of it. So, and I've seen the question around what is the difference between CSI and ESG, or is CSI or CSR within ESG? Well, CSR is not ESG, but it can be an enabler of what you're trying to achieve. And so when you talk about partnerships, beyond the clients we work with, there's other partnerships we're trying to do that address some concerns that are a national concern or a global concern. For example, we've touched on the issue of plastics pollution, Caveras and everything. We're already working with Shell Vivo, we're working with Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola has a recycling plant. What we're trying to do is now set targets for how much we can support in collecting plastics. And we want to kind of use our branches as collection points. You know, so Shell Vivo is already doing that. They're using some of their petrol stations as collection points. We'll be counting how much tons we're collecting so that we're contributing to a specific initiative that is broader than us through partnerships. Yeah. So I just want to distinguish that there is the business arm of ESG, which is, you know, from a financial perspective, as a bank, we'll sit with our clients, have this discussion around any ESG impacts that their operations or their activities may have. They put in place the mitigation measures. If they need consultants who are actually going to support creating these solutions that might mitigate the environmental impacts, then they do so. And they do sign covenants and legal contracts, obviously, for financing. So some of this is embedded. And that's what actually gets them to execute on what it is they are going to do in the right way. So once you put it as part of your processes, which is where we're talking about how does it get embedded. You have to have the right policies and processes that enable that conversation with your partners and your clients. But while you're doing that as a business, that's one thing. But what we're also doing from a partnership perspective is the philanthropy part of it, to ensure we're contributing to a larger cause. But we can't do this alone. CSI budgets are limited. And I like what Donald said here in the chat. ESG is driven by strategy. It is actually the way you do business. So your budgets for ESG should be part of the way you do business. CSI money is limited, so you can only do partnerships to help expand the impact of a cause. Yeah, but ESG should be the way you do business. So if you're a manufacturing company, there should be budgets already for how, for example, you may want to have a green transition on your energy. So maybe you want to stop using generators and fuel, and instead switch your factory into a solar operated company, rather factory. That is part of maybe a transitioning process, and it will need financing. So you find that companies can come to us, we'll have that conversation and support that cause, that sort of thing. But then you'll find that if ESG has to be, the budgets for ESG have to be driven as part of strategy and just part of the way you do business. And that's how we like to engage with clients on that matter. But those are the two aspects of partnership, and that's how it's being done.
Thank you very much, Catherine.
Rosalind,
yes,
before you give me a question, could I just continue with a comment on that has been made by both Albert and now Kathy? I think it is very, very important we don't look at ESG as an expense down in the P&L. I mean, it is part of the strategy, and it is part of doing business. And if you look at Kathy's presentation, what is going to happen, the consequences of not doing it are going to be quite serious. I mean, we're talking about lenders. Just had Kathy saying lenders are going to be looking at what are your strategies, how are you handling ESG matters. The shareholders who give you the money are looking at it. The clients, your own clients are looking at it. We're talking about supply chain and things like that. We're talking about employment, labor, and we are talking about something I mentioned that they are. You are going to lose. You can lose our own staff who feel they cannot work for a company that is not sustainable in that way. But there is also the last thing. There's something we call license to operate. You can get a license from a bank license or a trading license, or get a license from the Ministry of Petroleum Authority. That is very well. But you can go into an area and fail to operate. I mean, we all know what happened to Shell in Nigeria. So they had the license, but you can't operate. So it is part of the business, part of the strategy. Of course, what we've got to do to take conscious is that it is a balancing act, and we also have got to be aware of what we said, the bandwagon effect. So let's do it because we do it. So that is quite critical on that, so that we understand it. It has got to be part of your strategy, way of doing business. It's going to be the way of doing business in an ethical way, in a compliant way, in an SG way, if we can say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Japheth and Kathy. And at the risk of over-belaboring the point, I would also just want to opine that ESG actually works for us in the context of inclusion in the value chain, especially when you look at trade finance and where we are looking at green loans and green financing. You find that in the past it was hard for the value chains in Africa to access funding when it was not green funding. But with green funding all under the ambit of ESG, you'll find that we are going to be able to lend to more people, all because of the ESG adoption by both financial services, but even the value chain players in whichever value chain, whether it's in the agriculture or the manufacturing value chain. But back to you, Mr. Japheth Kato. There's another interesting question, much as we've touched it in one way or another, but it says that fintechs are attracting enormous funding from various sources. To what extent does ESG compliance have an influence in locking or unlocking capital in this space? I know we've touched it in one or another, but I think the aspect of fintechs and attracting funds does create more narrative around it. So over to you, Japheth. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I think we've got to really appreciate that the fintechs which were not here some years back are able to attract a lot of capital. But also we also need to also appreciate, like you just mentioned, that actually ESG compliant companies are also attracting a lot of capital. If you look at the big investors like BlackRock, if you look at their ESG funds, they're attracting a lot of money. And you talked about, I know of some development agencies that have been supporting agriculture, and they're only going to support green agriculture. So the attraction is there. We are looking forward to start seeing green bonds. Companies issuing bonds and green bonds being listed on the stock exchange. We are talking about carbon credit. So there is going to be, and what we are looking for is that green bonds should be able to attract very attractive interest rates and so on. We are looking at green financing. I know that Kathy, when she made the presentation, she talked about how do we get the green financing? What's the premium that will be available? So yes, fintech are attracting money, but ESG or green entities, green agriculture is also going to attract a lot of funding. So I think that's the way it is going to go. And as we say, it is going to be part of the business, part of the strategy in order to survive.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much to our panelists and to everyone who has been on this call. To wrap it up, I would like to give 2 minutes to each of our panelists for their parting shots before I hand over back to the leads coordinator, Ivan. So I think I'll start with our keynote speaker, Kathy. Please give us your parting shots in 2 minutes.
Sorry, thank you very much. I think it's really been an interesting conversation and an exciting one because it's going to really, I think, influence behavior, thinking, and just the way we think about business going forward. It's still new, and I can tell even from the questions, trying to see how does it come to life within an organization might be something tricky to understand. But once from an executive level, all the way from the board, all the way to your management, if they understand the link between what we're trying to do, which is really a humanity conversation when you think about it. Everything we're doing around climate change, you've seen the storm today. It wasn't your usual storm. It's blocking all the roads and everything. And there's a lot that's happening to the world that we need to pay attention to. But at the start of this conversation, I said, it's really about how do we meet our needs today? And because businesses contribute the most to these impacts, we have to be absolutely clear about managing how we're conducting business, but doing it in the right way so that we're safeguarding both humanity, the environment, animals, everything that is existing on this planet to keep us alive. So at the end of the day, that's what this is really all about. Let's just do business the right way. Let's take care of one another. And I know that it sounds like a soft thing to say, but really that's what it is. It's just that it translates into the way, companies operate to be profitable. There's a clear link between the two, ESG and performance of any organization. So that's my parting shot. My parting shot is really, let's look at ways that this can come to life. Let's continue to have engagements and conversations that will take this forward in a lot of businesses. So thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Kathy. I think next I'll go to Dr. Albert. I can see you on the screen.
Okay, thank you, listeners, for attending the workshop. What I can say as parting shot is that our League of East African Directors will have to take a lead in these standards which are being set by International Sustainability Standards Board. They are going to come up with exposure drafts. And I believe that we as Uganda should participate in giving comments such that our views are heard in terms of what the standards should be. Then secondly, of course, we need to do more research on ESG in Africa, and especially in East Africa, because most of the reports that we are seeing here are based in the US research, Europe, and Asia. So I'm seeing that in the next 1 year, we are going to get more rich content, which is more relevant to us in East Africa. Thank you very much and have a nice day.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Next, I will go to Mr. Japheth Kato. Over to you, Japheth.
Thank you so much, and it's been a great pleasure. For my parting shot, really, it is to say that our awareness is going to be very important. It's awareness at all levels, and this is where I think LEAD here has got to be congratulated for creating this, and others who are doing it. And this also, my example here is also going to touch on Proskovia's question of biomass. Some of you may be aware that now I'm wearing my Uganda Breweries hat. Uganda Breweries, we are doing a biomass project that is going to cost 42 billion Uganda shillings. It is purely a sustainability project. It's going to be launched sometime before the end of the year. Definitely, as Proskovia says, how do you do that? How do you support that? Uganda Breweries has already planted 10 million trees, and this year, as part of the strategy to create sustainable replacement energy and so on. And two other projects are being done in Kenya at Kenya Breweries. Now, again, this project is done because we believe in it at UBL, but as well, it's because we are part of Diageo PLC, whose strategy is to have a zero carbon emission by 2030. So that is cascaded down to us. But when I talk about awareness, I was speaking to my niece last night. And talking about what I'm going to do today. And I mentioned the biomass project and that we're going to spend 42 billion. She almost fell off the chair. She says, 42 billion in such a project, why don't you put it in hospitals and in schools? And I said, yes, you have a fair point at the long term. So she just could not understand how you can spend this type of money on this. So I said, this is an expenditure that is going to make us more sustainable and everybody. So there is a need to do that. So I would want to see more awareness, more education at all levels and at boards and so on, and at every occasion. So this is my parting shot. It is an investment. It is not an expenditure. It is for an organization to sustain itself. They've got to do that. On the other hand, we must also do the balancing act. I mean, this is very important, especially when we get attacked about oil and pipeline and so on. It is a balancing act. It is the transition from what? Transition from firewood, as the guy said. You're talking about the future, but where is the present? People say, stop eating meat. And somebody says, meat, what do you mean by meat? I only eat meat at a wedding or a funeral or once at Christmas. So we've got to be a balancing act and also defend our positions, but also be very clear that we appreciate the true value of the environment, of society, and of governance. And it's also very important, I'm a governance person, to emphasize the governance element of this. Environment people understand, social people understand, but all those cannot succeed unless you have a good governance framework, a good reporting framework. So thank you very much, Rosalind, and everyone else for your contribution. And my fellow panelists, it's been fantastic. I've learned a lot from here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kato. Very good parting shots. And last but not least at all, Proskovia, I would like to welcome you to give us your parting shots. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rosalind. Indeed, it's been a very fruitful discussion, a lot of lessons to learn. Maybe my parting remarks is just to recognize that no company will remain the same if they do not address the emerging issues on ESG. And of course, there is need for a balancing act. We need to be equitable in approach, especially if we are going to achieve the ultimate sustainable goals. And of course, the metrics have to be right. what are we measuring in terms of ESG for the greater good. One last thing that maybe I need to highlight is, of course, with the emerging global trends in ESG, which are leading to capital flight and talent flight, we shouldn't forget that we need to prepare for the work of the future. And if we do not prepare for the work of the future, we will have no work in the future. So thank you so much. It's been quite an interesting discussion. And thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much, Proscovia. I'll now hand over to Ivan to invite our patron from League of East African Directors. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Rosalind, for guiding such a very heavy content discussion. We just as you said, appreciate the participants, the different parts of both here locally, regionally. I want to recognize Mr. Charles Singari from Kenya, Maxwell Odera, Mr. Joel Kiwazo, who has been on the call from London, Chakravarti from India, Hans from the US. So this has quite generated a lot of interest from both here and also across the globe. I also want to appreciate our panelists, this keynote speaker Kathy for being quite well prepared for the presentation. Proscovia Banja on short notice. Also congratulating you on the idea that you recently held. Dr. Alberto Tete, Mr. Japheth Kato, forgetting our promoter, Rosalind Najuma, for a well presentation. I want to invite at this point in time our Dr. James Okero Omeyin, who is also a board capacity with companies, two companies that are quite involved in different activities. That is ESCOM, quite heavy on infrastructure, generating electricity, and also Citibank in the financial services, and also interest in the parliament that is, does legislation, and also as a private consultant. Dr. James Omeyin, and may the good Lord bless.
Okay, thank you very much. Ivan, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, you can hear you, Doctor. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. So, on behalf of the chairperson of the board of League of East African Directors and my fellow board members, and also I could say the entire membership of the League of East African Directors, I want to say this has been a very insightful session. A very big round of applause is deserving. We should give it to Proscovia, Nabanja, to Japheth Kato, Kathy Adengo, Dr. Alberto Tete, and of course, I learned a new word today, the prolocutor. We used to call them moderators. So Rosalind, well done, and thank you so much for this. This has been extremely insightful. I think what has come out from this discussion today is that this is a good start of a very important series of conversations. I want to agree with the panelists that it's important that we continue with these conversations. We need to raise the level of awareness. Kathy said very well that it might look very difficult in the beginning, but let's continue with these conversations. Let's see how we put this into practice, the concepts that are coming through. One thing is very clear, where we are going. Japheth said it very well, the kind of generation that's coming up now, the youth and going into the future, they're more interested in the purpose. And unless we start leading companies from the heart, from the purpose, we're going to get out of business. So I think that's what just Rosalind also said sometime earlier, that either you go big or you go out. So it's important that we embrace these ideals. I think what we should also be prepared for, Dr. Tete said very well that, we should be prepared to make a contribution to the setting of standards on the ESG front. We shouldn't lag behind. Exposure drops will soon be coming. Like he mentioned to us, he made it very clear during the COP26, there is a need now to have a standard setting body which is going to be relevant to the entire world. Of course, around that also, there have been questions around, we will need to think about standards which can also work for SMEs, for the smaller companies, which can be implemented at that level. So there's a lot of work ahead of us, but I think I want members also to remember what Proscovia said. There's a need to balance, the need for development, the need for growth, with protecting the environment, with pursuing the ideals of ESG. But of course, it's very clear that the good thing today I'm a Rotarian, I was listening to the legal and corporate affairs manager for UNOC. He had a presentation and he said they have done everything within the legislation to make sure they do not damage the beautiful Pearl of Africa. So there's a lot that has gone into thinking, even in the oil and gas sector, to make sure that we generate a little bit more wealth, but make sure that our environment is preserved for the future generations. And if I remember well what Kathy said, she said, this planet is a gift to us, and we must keep it well and pass it on in good condition to the next generations and to the future. So I think we are now on top of the hour. Ivan, thank you very much for putting this together. I want to thank all the board members and members who have participated in putting this together. It has been a very, in a way, I could say a life-changing experience. And I want to promise that as a board of League of East African Directors, we'll do our best to make sure we encourage these lead conversations in this direction. Thank you very much. Over to you, Ivan.
Thank you very much, Doctor, and for those remarks. We appreciate you once again for all those who have been in attendance. We look forward to having you back again for another series on the 26th of April 2022, where we shall be talking about how corporate boards can harness the heightened role of digitally driven operations. So we look forward to having you all. Thank you very much for attending, for your time, for your investing your everything that you've been about to about the board and the participants and the panelists and the keynote speaker, all of you in your different capacities. God bless you. Thank you very much. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Ivan, there's no sound. Ivan, there's no sound.
and later shares in the Cobra Motors Corporation, which imported Rover cars and Land Rovers from Britain, as well as Volkswagens from Germany. His first move into bigger business came the alliance he formed in 1992 with Sir Michael Plum, chairman of Tanganyika Breweries and the holding company, East African Breweries, which was itself a subsidiary of Allied Breweries, a British company. He became a director of East African Breweries in 1966, as well as of the related company, Ind Chartered Bank Uganda, in 1967. He remained on the board of Uganda Breweries for 43 years. In his farewell speech, he remarked, "If I had known that the job was temporary, I would never have taken it." It was in 1992 he was invited to become a member of the African Advisory Board of the Atlanta-based Coca-Cola Company, and in 2003 became president of the Oil and Gas Company, Uganda Limited.
You know, you look when you get out of the
Let me just go for them.
This is a personal one. This is the one. Stand the present.
But it's not so. It doesn't make us worry about what it does.
Very talented.
But that place we have targets for now.
Even the way we operate, Katilana got the IPO, standard not so much. We collected 36% of the IPO collections. We did not advertise, we did not do that.
How much is Summit collect?
The balance, I think, was 64. But you see, they felt like we didn't even deserve 1%.
Yeah, that's the fact that used to work. Public beats them on the footprint for us to feel like, like it gets more mileage.
Yeah, and that is.
I should get my card was stuck at
Having worked in organizations, I felt.
What is there?
You don't even get involved in business.
Yeah, but that is beautiful.
But save the ailing company, and the board said, "It's yours." The day he signed the last 2 checks, clearing the bank loans, he felt a heavy load taken off. He had promised that he would not walk away from a company in the red.